steering wheel.
Now that, my friend, was the Tiger 1, a destructive tank which would tear scars into Allied tanks as we know it. The Tiger 1 is very famous, and almost everyone connects it right to World War II, but in some cases also to movies. Now, the Tiger 1 itself is a very rare tank with only about 9 left in existence, which is kind of scary considering that there wasn't too many of them. But the Tiger 1 earned its place in World War II as one of the deadliest and most feared tanks of all. Let's go check in on this vehicle and see how interesting and what its performance was like. Now, the Tiger 1 itself had a 8.8 centimeter KWK L56 gun. That was its main cannon. The 8.8 centimeter gun, or the 88 millimeter gun, was very feared as it would punch holes into many Allied tanks, including the T-34, which was widely regarded as the best tank of World War II. Now, originally, this 88 millimeter gun was used as an anti-aircraft cannon, but as of Operation Barbarossa, when the T-34 was posing some issues, the only real gun that would penetrate it effectively was the 88 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. So therefore, it was put on the Tiger tank as a way to deal with T-34s. However, this 88 millimeter gun would also destroy tanks of other nature, such as the M4 Sherman, and British tanks in North Africa. Now, it had 25 to 120 millimeter armor, which is pretty insane, but this thing was essentially a giant safe with a gun sticking out. In other words, you were probably going to die. On the road, it had 121 miles worth of range, and in the country, it had around 68 miles of range, but I put 69 by accident. Its top speed was 28 miles per hour, and it weighed 54 tons. Now, this is a pretty heavy tank, and it was a heavy tank. And as you can see, it served on all fronts. It served in the Western Front against the Allies. There was only around 140 of them fighting against the Allies on the Western Front. Most of them were on the Eastern Front. Some saw service in North Africa, and others were even in the Italian Front. Very little, though. Now, only around 9 of these are left in existence, as I said before, which is pretty sad, but if you go to major tank museums, like this one in the UK, which is literally called the Tank Museum, you will most definitely find one of these. Now, aside from the Tiger 1 being probably one of the most famous tanks of World War II, it's also famous in a lot of other things, too. For example, it was feared by Allied soldiers all the way, but it's also really famous in movies and films, as well as TV shows. Right here is a Tiger tank mock-up from Saving Private Ryan. Towards the end, I'm pretty sure a Tiger tank attacked. I don't know. I watched very little of Saving Private Ryan. Right here is a shot from Fury where a Tiger attacked an armored convoy. It was a very small armored convoy of American tanks. Now, this tank is supposed to be Tiger 131, but that one's in a museum, which I think was in the Tank Museum in the UK. But this one's supposed to be Tiger 131. And in the movie, I'm pretty sure it knocked out all the tanks except for, like, one of them. I don't know. It was a Sherman version, though. And this scene right here, it's a Tiger 1 from, I believe, Band of Brothers. This picture specifically might not be from Band of Brothers, but there was a Tiger 1 in Band of Brothers, and it did destroy a Sherman tank, which is pretty realistic. are realistic enough for a Tiger tank. Now, in these movies, they did not obviously use real ones because there's only very few of them left, and some of them can't even drive. So, obviously, these were mock ups, but pretty good ones. Pretty good. Now, aside from that, too, a lot of some famous tank commanders I know there was one that was really famous. But tank commanders that were tank aces for Tiger Ones oftentimes were celebrities in Germany. So tank commanders who have piloted Tiger Ones who got a ton of kills were most likely celebrities in Germany, in the German Reich at least. Across Europe, they were probably hated because they were killing the Allies most likely, unless you were like Hungary or Romania because you loved the Axis powers or a part of them. But yeah, the Tiger 1, there's a lot known about it, considering that's like one of the most famous tanks. Its development started in 1938, but was really only brought to the table in 1941, where it was then prototyped and tested in 1942, and then began to be built and saw combat first in North Africa, then in Operation Barbarossa, and soon then in Europe, on the Western Front. Now, for me, the conclusion. I would say the Tiger 1, aside from it being famous, awesome looking, and that 88mm gun looks terrifying, it is a really good tank. However, there were some problems. No German tank is perfect. That's for sure. Towards the end of the war, when there was a lot of problems with factories, when they're all being bombed, a lot of times the engines would break down, resulting with Tiger tanks being abandoned. And unlike Sherman tanks, where most of the time you could just send it to like behind the lines and put in a new engine and it would be up and running in no time. Tiger tanks, you would probably have to put them on. You would have to put them on a train, send them to the factory where they came from, and then 6 months later, you have a tank that can operate again. Whereas with the Sherman, it might take a week. So obviously, it was a very complex tank, whereas the Shermans and especially the T-34 tanks were not as complicated, and most people could drive them fairly easily. With Tiger ones, you required a lot of training, and towards the end of the war, when their manpower and morale was basically nothing, training was not really accounted for. So towards the end of the war, Tiger One's performances were not doing so well. Especially too with fuel shortages, if they ran out of fuel, most likely they would just abandon them or explode them. If they didn't have explosives, they would just be abandoned. And that's how like some of them end up in museums, or that's why they got researched. Sometimes even some armies would take them and use them, which is pretty interesting because, well, at the time, everyone wanted a Tiger 1 because of how powerful it was. It was simply one of the best tanks. Was it the best tank? No, I would say the T-34 because, as I said in my T-34 video, old reliable. It was a reliable tank that you could count on. And with a Tiger 1, you could count on it, but if it got knocked out or if like the track broke or something like that, it would take a while to repair it. Which for that you have to give it some credit because it's a really effective tank and it was powerful 100%. However, it's not the greatest tank. It's good. It's probably the most famous, most popular tank, but it's not the best tank on the battlefield. It's reliable if it doesn't break down. And towards the end of the war, it would break down towards the end of the war. Now, I will say I do like this tank. However, in conclusion, it was an effective tank in 43 and 42, but by the time 44 and 45 rolled around, it was over. It was over for the tank, and B, it was over for the German Reich. And the tank actually stopped going in production at around late 1944 because then its brother, the King Tiger, its older brother, the King Tiger, was thrown into development. They only had around 400 of those, which surprisingly there's more of them in existence than there are Tiger tanks, which is weird. But yeah, in conclusion, it's a powerful tank, but only under the right circumstances. If you don't have a lot of fuel, if your crew is bad, and if you break down, you're out of luck with this tank. That's gonna conclude it for this video. Have an amazing day, and yeah, like and subscribe.